Well, today's going to be a difficult one because it's taken us long enough to be able to gather ourselves and stop talking to Vivian so that we can talk properly. You have so much to say. We'll start with the fact that you are Vivian McKinnon, owner of Hydro Ease, which is in Dundonald.
That's right.
And you're the only flotation tanks in Northern Ireland?
We're the only flotation centre in Northern Ireland. Okay. There is other tanks in other places. Okay, so
you have quite a lot of different flotation tanks.
We have two flotation cabins. But there is a tank in a place in Omagh, and I believe there's another one ready to open in Newtonards, just down from us.
Okay.
And there's also one in Finloch, but it's a float cave. But we're the only place that specialises in flotation therapy.
Well, let's talk first about the flotation therapy because there's a lot of other stuff. Right. Tell us about flotation therapy. Have you done it?
No, I'm doing it this week.
Are you?
Yes, I booked in for Thursday, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're not supposed to live the way we live. In the last, maybe 50, 60 years, life has changed massively, but we've stayed exactly the same. We've stayed exactly the same for millions of years. We've not evolved any further. So I believe flotation is the perfect antidote to modern life. It's 25 centimetres of body temperature water and half a tonne of Epsom salt. And you just float. You just float on top of the water.
So it was, obviously Kieran and stuff was telling me about it. Because I had heard through the grapevine, obviously, because you're based in Dundonald, the flotation tank. So I just thought it was getting into water and turning, it just wasn't what I thought it was. Like the impression that you get of something. So it's more salt than water.
Yeah, so it's the water's set at skin temperature. So as soon as you get in and you lie back, your unconscious mind, we make contact with the world 24/7, whether we're standing on our feet or sitting on our bum or lying on our back. So we're constantly sussing where we're at, and we've done that since we were born. If you look at a baby when they first take to their feet, they're kind of going, oh, and you can see inside their head they're going, right, one step, put my foot down, one step, and then we learn it and we get used to it. So when you go into the float tank, the subconscious mind's going, am I standing up? Am I sitting down? Am I lying on my back? Hang on a minute. And the water is the same temperature as your skin, which is the same temperature as the air. So again, the subconscious mind's going, hang on, where do I end and this environment begins? We can see, hear, feel, smell and taste very, very little. So that whole filtration system within our minds going, hang on a minute. When did I last feel like this? Because every experience we have in life, we compare and contrast what's happening now to what's happened previously to make our version of events. In the float tank, it's what we call a clean experience. So there's nothing that you can go, oh, this is the same as the time I done, blah, blah, blah. So it takes you right back to being in the womb. That's what it's been likened to. So it's almost like a reset. But at the same time, your whole skeletal structure. Now, when you're born with just over 300 bones. And it's all tissue and cartilage. And when it starts to fuse and form and your bones come together, you then have just over 200 bones. And your bones, when you take to your feet, your bones never get a chance to rest. Because again, as I say, you're always sitting on your bum or lying on your back. So there's some point you're always making contact with the world. In the float, you're not making any contact. So your whole skeletal structure just floats inside your body. And it's
so like a gravity thing then,
yeah,
Vivian?
So there's zero gravity.
Right.
Yeah.
And then what does that do then to your brain?
Well, what happens in flotation in your brain, there's lots of research now coming out about that in terms of things like mental health, in terms of what happens is there's a part of the brain called the salient mode network, and it's where your limbic system is. And your limbic system is your emotion centre. It's also where your fight or flight is, which is the right name for that is your amygdala. So what happens in the float...
Sorry, say that again. Your real name is?
The amygdala.
The amygdala. The amygdala.
The amygdala.
Right.
So when you go into the float tank, what happens is it starts to restrict activity within that part of the mind. So it means that if you have an experience or an event or something that every time you think about it, it's like, oh God, here's this thing again. And you're like, I'll not think about that and I'll try and think about something else. All you're doing is avoiding. And avoidance is not a solution for anything. So in the float, sometimes what it can do is it can allow you to single out one thought and kind of go, actually, what does that mean? Without the impact of the usual response that you get from it. What it also does is it takes the mind into what's called theta state, which is your natural learning and consolidation state. So it means that you can... Do you know if you sit down in the middle of the afternoon and you maybe drift off and the doorbell goes or the dog barks and you're like, oh, what time is it? And you've been like, God, I've been sleeping for 20 minutes.
Almost the daydream state.
So it takes you in that state.
Yeah, like that middle between sleeping and awake. You're like, oh,
that's
the
it.
in-between.
That's it. And what happens then is the brain produces the same endorphins in the space of an hour as it would in about 5 to 7 hours sleep. Now, it's not the same as 5 to 7 hours sleep, but it washes the brain in the same way. So you can come and float and then go straight to bed and fall into a deep sleep. And what it means is, when we go to bed at night, we spend about 10, 15 minutes in theta state before we then go to... Do you know when you're lying in bed and you can hear the whirling of the fan in the bathroom and maybe hear the TV downstairs and then it just kind of drifts off? That's theta state. What happens when you've had a float is when you go to bed, you almost like free fall down through that and you go straight into delta wave, which is your deep sleep. So for people who have maybe insomnia or people who work in shifts...
This must be amazing for people who suffer badly from insomnia.
Yeah.
Right.
But even like I do a lot of work with post-traumatic stress disorder, post-traumatic stress injury, and it's just a lovely feeling of safety. It's a lovely feeling, like the whole introspective side of it. So while the environmental stimulation round about you is completely restricted, it means that the body and the mind has a chance to just go, because we spend 80% of our energy fighting the effects of movement and balance and all these different things that are going on. In the float tank, you've no need for movement, you've no need for balance, you've no need for processing all this external information. So the body and the mind goes, right, what can we do now? So your body will heal and repair 4 times faster in a float environment than it will in a bed. So even for physical injuries, things like fibromyalgia, arthritis, but also for things like sports injuries, broken bones, I just think...
It's like it's literally given every single thing a break.
Totally. It's like switching off. It's like powering down. It's just, even just an hour away from your phone, we're so driven by technology these days. So to have an hour in the water where it's just you, there's nobody else, it's just to rest, repair, and just recollect yourself.
Restore.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
It's amazing.
I'm so excited.
It's amazing.
That's not the only thing you do then at the centre?
No. So I've developed a program. So over the last... probably about 20 years, I've been looking into human dynamics and looking into how do you do me? Like, how do we do that? I had an experience, I had lots of adverse childhood experiences, I had lots of early adult life trauma and almost died in 1999. And when after that experience, I was then thinking, I need to change, but I didn't know how to do it. So I then thought, I need to find out more about me. So I started to volunteer for a charity. I'd done various different things. And I went into a float tank myself for the first time in 2004. And when I went, it was like an egg-shaped coffin-like thing. And a friend had told me it'd be really good for me. And I remember standing looking at it and thinking, no way. Like,
the claustrophobic.
I was like, there's no danger I'm getting in there. Closing the lid on top of myself. With me, just me in this head, no way. And then there was a wee voice in my head that was like, get over yourself and just get in the bloody water. So I got in the water and I lay back and I was like, this is so boring. I've got to be here an hour. Oh my God. And then something, I don't know what, but something happened. And I just had this, just zonked out. And then I had this dream, this vision. Like when I was a kid, when I was about 4 years old, I ran away from something. And I'm not sure what it was, but I knew that I remember going and lying in long grass. And my heart was beating out my chest and I was really scared. And I remember being really sore. And I remember seeing myself, this sounds really mad, but I remember seeing myself coming out of myself and almost like floating away. And it was such a profound experience. It always stuck with me, but I'd never spoken to anyone about it. In that float tank, after I'd kind of zoned out, I just had this vision, and it was almost like I was floating through the walls of this centre, and there was float tanks, and there was people in for addictions, and there was a creche attached to it, and there was all these different things going on, and there was a reception book and all of this stuff, and then I heard time's up. And I just about had a heart attack. I jumped up and I was like, oh my God. And then I had visions of me standing on a stage and doing all this stuff. And I was like, that's amazing. Like, I need to know what's just happened. Because I felt like that part of me at 4-year-old that disappeared came back, integrated into me, and was just like, right, lady, we've got work to do. And I came out and I said to the woman,
that's unreal.
And I said to the woman who owned the centre, I was like, oh my God, that was amazing. And I seen this and I seen that, and I felt this, and I had this vision, and I had that. And she said, yeah, it's a lovely spa treatment. And I was like, no. I said, that's a mental health intervention. Now, I was struggling with addiction at the time. And addiction, when I talk about addiction, I just was struggling with fear, with pain, with trauma, and I was using anything I could to avoid it. So I was addicted to eating, I was addicted to not eating, I was addicted to cocaine, I was addicted to alcohol, I was addicted to cannabis, like anything in that moment. And then when I felt myself getting to the point where I was like, well, this could become an issue. I was like, I'll change it, I'll go and gamble loads of money. And again, we were talking before we started this, it was about the secret, having something that was just for me, that nobody else could have.
Yeah, let's just go back to that wee bit, because we talked about it just before we started recording there, about the secret, not the secret, Rhonda Byrne, the secret. We're talking about that. Just I think it's really a corker, so I just want to...
I think a lot of people, you know, like I do a lot of public speaking, and I think it's the one thing that kind of resonates with people. So when I grew up, first of all, when I was born, I was supposed to be a boy. My mum had a wee boy before me, and he had died of a perforated ulcer. He was only 6 weeks old, and it really, really impacted my mum. My mum had a lot of trauma in her childhood. Her mum was alcohol dependent. My gran had a lot of child trauma in her childhood. So it was this generational bag of shit that had been handed from one generation to the next. And so when I was born, my mum, the first words I ever heard was, "Oh, I thought it was a wee boy," and I screamed apparently for the first 8 months of my life, just screamed. When I was about 8 months old, I fell down a flight of concrete stairs, and it just set the tone in a baby walker, and it set the tone for a really traumatic childhood. My mum's drinking then started to pick up. So my dad kind of, you know, he tried to do the best he could with the resources he had, and his whole thing was just shut down from it, pretend it's not happening, and everybody just, shh, don't tell anybody about your mum's drinking, don't tell anybody about, you know, like...
You feel disloyal taking it out of the house. I know this only too well.
And it was, you know, we'll get in trouble with social work, and my little brother was leaking. Like, he was kicking off at school and stealing things and fighting, and he was very emotional and really emotionally driven. So that was bringing a lot of attention. So my dad was like, no. So, and I remember sitting in a hospital one time. My brother was in front of these child psychologists, and they had the family in, and we were all in front of this mirror. And before we went in, my dad had us verse, do not say a word. We must have looked so dysfunctional just sitting there, like, not talking at all. But my dad's a fantastic man. He's an amazing man. I still have my dad. My mum sadly passed. But he would then say, now, when you're out there, don't you think you're better than anybody else? And never lend money, never borrow money, and don't lie, and just be the best you can. And
just trying his best with the tools he had, and God bless him.
That's it.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking as a kid, hang on, but I have to lie and keep secrets in the house, and so again, it just set that.
So that's the secret that we're talking about, the keeping everything in the house, as it's called. I know that through Al-Anon.
Even when I thought anybody was going to suss, it was that people might find out the secret here. But do you know what? That actually is that's what drove a lot of my addictive behaviours as well. Was that feeling that
there is a secret as much as keeping the secret.
That's it. But just the feeling that it gave me in my body, it was that excitement and somebody might find out here. Somebody might find it, and that
adrenaline.
Seeking, yeah,
the adrenaline. I've never actually thought about.
You get used to operating on a certain level of adrenaline. Had not a similar experience, but something happened with me whenever I was going through my divorce. I was like that constantly, because I was so afraid of what my future was going to look like, because I had this future in my head and it was all gone. And I was like that all the time. And I had been seeing a personal trainer, and anytime I thought about exercising, I went, like I couldn't, like I kind of got even more tense at the thought of trying to go, and then I felt the guilt of not going to see the personal trainer or whatever. And I spoke to the GP about it, and I was like, I know that exercise is really good for your mental health, but every time I think about exercising, my body gets tense and I can't. He goes, you're operating on a low level of adrenaline all the time. So anytime you're saying to your body, let's put the adrenaline up, it's going, no, we've enough to be dealing with here.
Yeah.
But for you, you had sort of almost the thrill of the adrenaline, or you were used to adrenaline, and you were like, you needed more.
Well, what had happened,
So
because
weird.
my mum's drinking really ramped up, so did our behaviours and our erraticness. And I remember if my mum was around me and she raised her voice, I would wet myself. And then, of course, I would go to school, and then I would get picked on and various different things at school. And then I came out in all these bursts of sores. So I had a big sore on my head, I had sores all over the insides of my arms. And again, it was just the stress response. It was my body's way of just getting rid of the emotion. It was dangerous for me to show emotion in my house, because showing emotion wasn't something that I was allowed to do. That was my mum's job. So as a kid, I was kind of going, I can't show emotion because everything's messy as it is, and I need to be fine for my mum, and I need to make sure she's okay. And I had rubella as a kid as well. So again, it was just, my whole system was just the whole time.
Just stress on the immune system's just not gonna.
That's it. And from a very, very early age.
Wow.
So then, growing up, so then by the time I was 8, I'd experienced every abuse you could imagine. And that was not directly at the hands of my mum and dad. It was through being left in vulnerable situations when my mum was drinking and my dad was at work.
So you weren't being protected.
That's it.
Yeah.
So I remember at 8 years old, there was a party in our house, and I was behind the couch. Like, I used to go into the party, I used to sneak around the door and have a wee look and then go back to the bedroom. But I remember going in and stealing a drink from the side of my mum's chair and going round the back of the sofa and drinking it in a winner. I don't know what, I think it was Bacardi, because that's what she drank at the time, but I can't actually remember. But I just remember as soon as I drank it, I was like, oh, I've done something bad. But then I just felt this warmth and this feeling of, this is
change.
Totally.
Just the change of feeling, which was nice. Do you remember that specifically? Wow.
Yeah. And that just felt, it was like a release. It was like a warm blanket.
Okay.
It was, and it just, but I then came out from behind the couch and I started telling jokes. And I started I think that was where I realised that my role in the family was the joker. My role was the one. So
the entertainer.
That's it. So I would come in, and when I look back now, and I think the work that I do now, my mum was training me from I was a tiny child, because I can walk into somewhere and I can pick up on an energy right away. I can walk into a room and there's sometimes I can be like, something's just happened in here, or I can. Sometimes if you meet someone and you think, I never got a chance to chat to them, but they seemed really, really nice. Or you go,
intuition with people.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Or you walk in, you go, do you know what? I never got a chance to chat to her. I really like her. There's something about her. And I think that's what my mum, I would walk into the house and I would shout, it's me. And wherever the voice came from in the house, I could tell you what had been happening in that house.
You were reading.
I was reading everything.
From a young age, okay.
If I walked in and the voice came up the stairs, the handbag, the school bag got put down, and I about turned and walked back out the house again. So
it's like I call it your spidey senses. Mm-hmm. It's like your spidey senses are so heightened. You're so heightened that you can we were actually talking about this earlier with something else that happened, and my spidey senses started tingling. I knew something wasn't right, and it ended up. And then you think, am I just being paranoid? Is it fear, or is it my intuition? Is it my gut? Mm-hmm. And it can be a bit confusing.
And that's the thing, we have 3 brains. We have the head, the heart and the gut. And if one of them talks to you, but again, as kids, we're told, don't listen to your body. You're in class and you put your hand up and you're like, Miss, can I go to the toilet? Teacher's like, you've got 10 minutes till break. No, you'll sit where you are. So psycho the mind tells soma the body, shh. And then you get these other messages from your body. You go home and you say, Mum, can I have a sandwich? And your mum's like, what? It's only half an hour till dinner. No, you're not. So again, psycho the mind tells soma the body, shh. And this happens consistently throughout our life till we start getting messages from our body that the brain just is like, nah, we're not listening.
And then we add the medication on.
Mm-hmm. Now, 80% of messages are afferent and efferent, so they move either up the way from the nervous system or down the way from the nervous system. So 80% of our messages are afferent. They come up from the body. They tell us these messages. But all too often we're so busy in our own heads that we just don't listen. And the amount of people that come into hydros to float and they'll say, do you know, I've got a really sore back and it was fine, but I just leant into the boot of the car and lifted a bag out and it just popped. And then I'll say, is that the first time you felt that? Yeah, well, I suppose actually. Well, I had a niggle about 6 months ago, and then, well, I've had a wee niggle for the last 3 or 4 years, but nothing like this. And it's like, because you've not listened to your body for the last 3 or 4 years.
Screaming at you.
And now the body's like, do you know what? There you go, take some time off your feet. And that's just what happens to us. And especially when we go back to looking at childhood experiences. Now, thinking about, when you think of childhood experiences we've had, we didn't have them as the adult we are now. So something that might seem silly, trivial, minuscule that happened as a child is exactly the thing that's holding you back or preventing you from doing whatever, because we don't develop a part of the brain called the critical faculty barrier. And this is the bit between the conscious and the subconscious mind. And it's like your judge and jury. And it says, that's right, that's wrong, that's good, that's bad, that's safe, that's dangerous, that's truth, that's lies. We don't have that. So up until about age between kind of 5 and 7, we just believe everything. We believe, like, if I said to you when you were 3 years old, do you want to see the fairies in the garden? You would have been like, oh, is there fairies in the garden? And you would have came with me looking for, and actively looking for fairies and believing, because you would have no conscious concept of the thought that, like, she might be telling lies. Mm-hmm. But if I said to you when you were 8 or 9, do you want to see the fairies in the garden? You would have went, fairies, well, you go first then. So there would have been a bit of you that still would have been like, I wonder, but there would have been another bit. So remember, a lot of the things that happen to us as a child, we think is about us. We think it's our fault. We think it's, it's all about us. And the difference between, and I do a lot of work with my clients on this, the difference between guilt and shame is, guilt is, I have done something bad. Shame is, I am a bad person. So if you believe you're a bad person, you'll do bad things. So someone does something to you, with you, at you, that you then go, oh, that's because I'm a bad person. That's then your shame. So their guilt becomes your shame. You then go through a period of, I'm a bad person, I'm a bad person. You then get an opportunity to do something that you perceive might be bad, and you do it, and it's like, oh, I'm a bad person. And you fulfill that belief that shame has given you, and it just perpetuates. And then because you're a bad person, you then do something else on someone else that you think, oh my God, that's because I'm a bad person. That becomes their shame. And it's that generational bag of stuff that we just don't take the time to stop and go, let's have a rummage in this. Mm-hmm. Like, all my beliefs. Now, if you look at the word, we learn about the world based on what somebody else believes. So if you, as a child, if your mum sees a spider and she's like, oh, a spider, and she jumps, in your head you go, right, that's how you respond when you see a spider. So you see a spider and you go, oh, and then you're like 40 and you do that.
Passing it on.
And somebody's like, what is it with spiders? And you're like, oh, I just don't like spiders. And then
no
they're
reason.
like, is it the body? Is it the legs? Oh no, but you've been taught not to like spiders. Mm-hmm. So what somebody else believes becomes your belief. And if I was to write these 2 words up on a board and write them in big bold letters, the 3 letters in the middle of each of the words spell L-I-E. So everything everybody else believed was the lies they were told. That then became your belief, and at the core of everything that your beliefs is a lie. Wow. And if you challenge that, if you unpack that and go, right, hang on a minute, what is it that's holding me back? Like I had a huge thing around money. And again, we got this new house in the estate. I'm from a tiny village just outside Edinburgh. And we got this new house in the estate. And my dad said, Spam Valley. And I was like, Spam, why do you call it Spam Valley? He said, have you seen the prices of their houses? The people who live in their houses can only eat spam for tea because they've spent that much money on their house. So again, as a child believing, oh my God, well, I never want a house like that, because if I have a house like that, then I'd have to have spam for tea. And and not that I remember having that thought, but looking back, so I had this belief around money. It was kind of, and I felt like, in the business I'm doing, there was something that was holding me back and stopping me from moving forward and doing other stuff. And I went to London and done some training with this guy, and he started talking to me about money. And he was talking about, he was like, well, what do you think of when you think of current? And I was like, current? He's like, if you think of water, and I thought a current's like a flow. And he went, yeah, well, money's current, say. And it should flow, it should come in and go out. He's like, hold on to your breath. So I held on to my breath, and he said, hold it. And I was like, and then eventually I went, like that. And he went, it's exactly what you do with money. You hold it, and then you just put it, because you're no used to it being a current. One of the beliefs, obviously, that you have is that money should be stored up and stored up and stored up. So there's loads of stuff that when you go back, as an adult and think of, right, as a child, what would that have felt like? What would that have been like for a 6-year-old, an 8-year-old, whatever age it was that you had that experience or created that belief? Because if you go back and like just give validation to that child version, the child version of us lives in us. Mm-hmm. She doesn't go away. It's not like we hit a certain age and the child version says, right, well, I'm away now, I'll see you later, I'll hand it over to the teenage version. And then the teenage version says, well, I'm away now, hand it over to the 20-year-old. I'm away, I'll hand it over to the 30-year-old. We're like Russian dolls inside us, in the very core of us. And the core of me is that baby that was born screaming.
That Russian doll, wow.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing analogy, because it's so true.
That's it. And we build inside of all of us, we're all born to be joyful and happy, and then we're 2 years old or 3 years old and we're jumping about the couch and we're like, our brothers tipping us up, and we're getting told, stop that, get down, God's it. And then you come through and somebody gets their bum smacked and somebody else gets put, and it's like, that's his fault. And then it's like there's a layer of that's sadness. You're like, that's not my fault. And then something else happens and the same thing happens again, and you're like, oh, it's always that, he always gets. And then there's a layer of anger, and then there's fear, and then there's guilt, and then there's hurt, and then there's shame, and then there's embarrassment, and in the middle of it is just this wee joyful person going, oh, just let me out. And every now and again she comes up and one of the layers goes, no, go back down again. No, go back down again. But when you can crack these layers and get into that core in the middle and make sense and almost kind of go, right, come here, give me, like, have a hug. And remember that you're the adult now. And we were talking earlier about behaviours. How many times do you see somebody and you go, they were getting on like a child? Because, of course they were, because they're showing the behaviour at the point when they wanted their needs met that got them their needs met. Now, whether it was that they fought, whether it was that they threw a tantrum, whether it was that they sat sulking, whether it was that they just went quiet and reversed back into themselves, whatever it was, it worked at a time that they needed it. But what we fail to recognise is that as adults, it's not a good strategy.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing, absolutely amazing. That Russian doll thing's blew my head off, hasn't it? It kind of, what the thought came into my head was my plant medicine journey. It's like it takes.
I'm about to start mine.
And you're just left, and you're like, oh yeah, I forgot I was this.
That's it.
You know?
That's it.
I forgot I was this. It takes all the layers off.
Tell us about the other techniques then, because you have the raft.
So raft. So as a program, it's called Reconnection and Floatation Therapy. So it's an hour working one-to-one with me, and then an hour in the float tank. And what I do is I work very much. You bring to me. I never ever set a session. I don't have like a program of we do this and then we do this and then we do this. So you come to me. I work. Yeah. So I work with brainwave states, and I work with the belief that we all carry around in us a thing called Emily. And Emily works with Amy. Amy's our amygdala, because it's spelled AMYGD. And Emily is event. We all have events, meaning. The meaning that we give events based on our previous experience. But sometimes the meaning that we give events, the previous experience we've had, is 3 years of life, because this event's happened when we were 4 years old, whatever that is. So we have the event, we have the meaning, and then we have the landscape of the brain. So in that moment, did you feel vulnerable or did you feel resilient? So a resilient brain is like a beautiful forest. It's lush and it's green and there's rivers and there's all this lovely stuff. Or is it vulnerable, where it's like an arid, dry Sahara desert? You know, depending on where your landscape of your brain is, it'll depend on the response that you have or the reaction. So if it's vulnerable, it'll be a reaction, because you go like that and you're, oh my goodness, and you're not able to problem solve, and you're not able to be solution focused and find a way forward and kind of go, well, if I've done that, and you have no access to the right brain, no access to that creative thought process. But if you're resilient, you can kind of go, right, oh well, this means do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go and phone this person. I'll go and look on it, and you're straight into, how can I solve this? How can I solve this? If in that moment you have an event and the meaning that you give it and the landscape of the brain tells you you're vulnerable, and there's an element of inescapability, which is the I, that feeling of being trapped, what happens is the brain then goes, right, we need to take a picture of what's happening here. So if anything at all that I see, hear, feel, smell and taste is in my environment going forward, I'll be alerted. So you almost get like these meerkats that go, right, that smell of that aftershave, that taste of that pie, that red jacket, that eyebrow going like that tone of voice that's like that. So then what happens is you find yourself in another situation, somebody speaks in that tone of voice and you're instantly going, oh, and but again, it's your wee meerkat in your brain. So I work with people where I get them to just kind of talk and just say, I do a lot of pre-work and I reframe a lot of things and I use a lot of hypnotic language and language structures that instantly get past that part of the brain that's going right, wrong, good, bad, safe, dangerous. Because remember, that's the part of the brain that's going, did I let you in? This is my subconscious. This is where all my stuff is. We'll just keep you in the conscious mind. So a lot of the work I do is bypassing that critical faculty barrier by saying, this is a space for you. I'm holding space for you. This is for you to make sense of you. And generally what will happen is when somebody starts talking about something, you'll see if they drop into a memory or they start playing the memory. Remember, when we think about something, it's like a holograph in front of us. It plays like a movie from the back of our head. And so many of us, we're all hypnotised. We're all hypnotised by our previous experiences. 3 of us could walk down the road and we would pick up very different things. You'd be like, did you see the blue car? I'd be like, what blue car? The guy, were you not looking at that guy in the window? And you're like, what window? Was there a window? Because we're all filtering so much information.
Our own realities, our own perceptions. Mags talked about this in the other interview.
Mm-hmm. Because we're all patterned, predictable and programmed.
Yeah.
Because of the way we've seen the world, the way and the things, the experiences that we've had.
So listening to you talking there, it makes me even more empathetic of people, or sympathetic, whatever, it's like no one has the same perception. Mm-hmm. So no one we should try to be kinder to each other.
That's it.
And not be annoyed if someone's not getting something as quick as you or not understanding, or it's like God knows what was the things you said? Event
meaning landscape and inescapability.
All that different, how complicated and what's the word I'm looking for? Like intertwined that all this. You can never have the same combination.
That's it.
Like even ourselves, we are changing every single day because new events, new programs, new landscapes every single day. So it's about being kinder, like ultimately, and a bit more understanding of other people's traumas and events and experiences.
And it's how people's brains are operating. So when we've had trauma and we've had that experience, and our brains go up into a thing called gamma. So during the sessions when I'm working with people, I'm watching for that happening. So I'm watching for the muscles tightening around the face here. I'm watching for the lips, becoming smaller. I'm listening for keywords. I'm listening for they made me. Nobody makes us do anything. We choose to respond in a way that's right for us. So we can say, oh, well, I'm only like this because you do this.
Yes.
And it's like, well, do you know what you're doing there? You're moving away from pain. How are you ever going to identify what you actually want if you're spending your life going forward, looking backwards and going, I'm never going to have that again. And nobody will ever do that. Oh, well, I've got that. It's totally on my radar. That'll never happen. What do? You bring all of that into your life. So we were talking earlier about, and when I'd heard you chatting earlier, what you're talking about is the reticular activator system, so the RAS. It's a bunch of neurons that sit just at the top of the brainstem, and they are the things that identify. They're the things that filter out all your different information. But if you're constantly focusing on, like I was single for 8 years, and I dated some of the most eligible guys where I lived, and I would have 1 or 2 dates, and then I'd be like, no. And I remember dating this guy, and my friend was like, well, and I was like, I don't know if he's for me. She was like, Viv, he's stunning. I was like, I know, but like he's got that thing going on with his eyebrows and She was like, how did you even notice that?
Yep.
Another guy, it was like, white socks. I do like white socks. And she was like, see, while you constantly focus on what you don't want, how are you ever going to find out what you do want? Mm-hmm. And that's what our reticular activator system does. So when we're feeling that, that things are never going to work for me, it's always me that gets this, why do I never get a break? Why do I never get... Well, you never get a break because your subconscious mind is hearing you saying, why do I never get a break? Why is this always me? Mm-hmm. It's not looking at, if I was to get a break, what would that look like? The two most powerful words are what if. What if I got a break? Because the subconscious mind goes, what if? What if? Mm-hmm.